Good afternoon. Where would you rather be poor at? In the city or in the country? In the early 1930s, during the Great Depression in America, a couple by the name of Scott and Helen Nearing decided they preferred to be poor in the country. They decided they wanted to commit to providing for themselves from the land. The Nearings left New York in 1932 and purchased an old farm in the wilderness of Vermont for $2,500. For the next 19 years, they lived, they contemplated, they volunteered, and they played. They called their way of life the good life, and it definitely sounds like it was. They spent many years building structures from concrete and stone, growing fruits and vegetables, and allowing others who sought this way of life to come to their home to learn from them. Scott and Helen Nearing are often called the grandparents of the back-to-landers, as they really inspired many others to go back to simpler ways of living, to not be engulfed with consumerism, to not put their health at risk by eating all of the processed foods that were starting to take place in America, and to be contributing members to the human race. Scott and Helen Nearing were passionate about the food they ate. They believed that Americans were welcoming sickness and bad health by eating increasingly processed foods. I'd like to share a quote from Helen from her book, The Simple Food for the Good Life. In the book, she states, "When you're faced with food that has been sterilized, fumigated, hydrogenated, hydrolyzed, homogenized, colored, bleached, puffed, exploded, defatted, degermed, texturized, or you don't know what has been done to it, the safest rule is not to eat it." So the Nearings believed in growing their own food, and they practiced organic gardening. They only ate what was in season. They only grew what was in season. And interesting enough, they did not own animals to provide meat or dairy to their diets. They were vegetarians. They felt that eating raw and vital, healthy fruits and vegetables would increase their health and their longevity. They also believed in working very hard. They built all of the structures on their properties, which they did own 2 properties. Originally, they lived in Vermont, and later they moved to Maine. They worked on soil improvement, and they worked in their gardens. They perfected their stone masonry skills, following the flag technique, which is building with concrete and stone, and they built many structures on their properties. They provided nutrients to the soil so that the soil would be healthy and produce good, nutritious foods for their diets. They worked their gardens every day, growing seasonal crops. They also had to provide for a little bit of financial income, so when they lived in Vermont, they tapped into their maple trees and produced maple syrup to sell or barter with. They couldn't do that when they moved to Maine, so they established a blueberry patch and cultivated blueberries, fresh organic blueberries, to sell or barter with for things that they may need, equipment they may need to borrow to help with their gardening. "Work," said Scott, "helps prevent one from getting old. My work is my life. I cannot think of one without the other. The man who works is never bored, is never old. A person is not old until regrets take the place of hopes and plans. Work and interest in worthwhile things are the best remedy for aging." Scott and Helen Nearing believed in having quality time for themselves, to grow in education and knowledge, to help others, to write, to lecture, to volunteer. They believed in this so strongly that they lived by a rule that they called the 4-4-4 rule. They believed in spending 4 hours a day for bread labor, which included working in their gardens, working to provide the food needs. They worked on their shelters. They even built some of their own tools that they used, and they made their own clothing. They then spent 4 hours in civic work, which included anything that would be of value to their community or neighbors. and that would make them a contributing member of society. And then they spent 4 hours for professional pursuits and recreation. They loved to ski. They also were very widely read and they wrote often. They believed in intelligence and education, and they constantly used their professional time to read and write. And they actually published many pamphlets and booklets, mostly on politics and their way of life. They believed in keeping up with politics and the government and world events. And Helen especially believed that music was enriching to one's life. They believed in community. They wanted to be helpful and be cooperative with others. They invited many people to their home where they taught them and showed them how to live the simple life, how to make it possible to live that way. They also shared with them good, wholesome foods that they made, and they also did use these people for labor, as it was just the two of them. They did need help sometimes. They often helped with community projects, and they lectured around the world teaching people how to live simply and minimally. Scott and Helen Nearing were definitely pioneers in getting back to the land and being self-sufficient. They inspired many people to live more simply and healthfully. They inspired others to be a valuable member of their communities. They believed in living a good life. They believed in health, in hard work, in community and fellowship, in loving the land and being self-sufficient. They believed this is the way that people should live. They hoped to have others see this way of life, and that it is possible to live this good life.